in the whole concept I do believe in, which is that there are no bad parts, like the parts that are there that are behaving in a, quote unquote bad way or like maladaptive, they are actually trying to protect you from something.
Sure. Yeah.
And so even most extreme, like things like narcissistic personality disorder, which is a very difficult set of patterns, deep down, like that person is like deeply in pain, and that exiled part is buried, and so the protector parts is what most people interact with.
Mhm. Hey, beautiful. Welcome to Naturally Empowered Living, your safe space to guiding you on your unapologetic self-awakening journey. This is your weekly sanctuary for waking up from autopilot and transforming the way you approach life through the power of meditation, energetics, and root cause therapy. It is my mission to help you heal unprocessed emotions and release stuck energies by alchemizing your struggle cycles into opportunities for deep self-love, awareness, trust, and connection, to return to your innate essence of being, stepping back into your energy of alignment. Because here, we honor all parts of ourselves, the messy and the magic, the shadows and the light, embodying all parts that make you, you. So if you are ready to get to the root of cultivating real change, get cozy, grab your journal and maybe favorite crystals, and let's discover our power within together. Hello, hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode of the Naturally Empowered Living podcast. Today, I am so honored to be joined by another incredible guest, Kymber Maulden. She is a women's nutrition consultant, somatic trauma coach who runs a practice called Nourishing Our Sanity. She supports women at the intersection of their metabolic health and complex trauma, helping them navigate the challenges they face in healing and then thriving. Kymber has worked with hundreds of women throughout her career, and she's recently launched her own podcast, also called Nourishing Our Sanity, where she dives into women's health through the lens of C-PTSD, physiology, and culture. So today, I am so excited to explore how Kymber's unique approach is making a difference in the lives of so many. So just thank you so much for being here, Kymber.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So let's start with you. Like, what inspired you to have this focus of metabolic health with complex trauma, working with women? Kind of, let's hear a little bit about your journey to what brought you here today.
Yeah, for sure. So, where to start? So,
Mm,
my career and education background is actually early child development. And so I used to take care of small children, studied that in school, and then went into doula work and predominantly did postpartum doula work. And so I worked closely with mothers, new mothers, and newborns, and just like the family system.
mm,
And then throughout this whole period was struggling with my own health. So that's kind of, I think, a pretty common story for people who go into this kind of work is like having their own health issues and needing to figure out what's going on. In the process, becoming potentially more passionate about health as they learn more and learn like more of the problems with the medical system or, just the culture in general that's contributing to the issues. So that was definitely part of my story. Started looking at holistic health when I was in my early 20s, went through kind of more of a dropped out of college the first time and went through this holistic health school in San Francisco. It was very like, I mean, there was aspects of it that were really helpful. It was also pretty ungrounded. It was like, lots of like crystal healing and energy and all that, but vegan, kind of like some vegan dogma in the nutrition side of things. But it did give me like a good first taste of what holistic means
mhm.
and just this idea that stress contributes to illness and we hold stress in our bodies and there's a body brain connection and our lifestyles contribute to that. So all of that kind of really did open the door for me.
Mhm.
And I started to take a lot more, sort of place a lot more emphasis on my nutrition.
Mhm.
And whereas like I have, a long history of like started dieting early in life and had an eating disorder. And so that's a really common story that a lot of women have.
Mhm.
So I was pretty used to focusing on food, just not necessarily for the right reasons.
Sure.
And so I think when I left college that first time and started to study holistic health and pay more attention to my diet, I definitely did like take the dieting and kind of obsessive behaviors that I had in my teens into the health space because you just, you can just recycle your patterns and, replace them, replace maybe like less healthy patterns with slightly less healthy patterns.
Mhm.
And so So a lot of my 20s was like trying to, dabbling in different holistic things and different diets. I was vegan for almost 5 years. That didn't go so well for me. Did a lot of meditation and like spirituality practices and then decided to go back to school
Hmm.
and to study nutrition. So I actually got a science degree. I was planning on getting a licensing for dietetics. But at this point, I had like been so immersed in the holistic world that when I started to research dietetics programs, I was just very unimpressed.
Yeah.
And like, and I, we were all unschooled in my family and like lots of trauma there around getting introduced to the school system. And so I didn't want to like have to go back through more schooling if I was going to be miserable in the program and it was going to be like, not really aligned with it. So, from there, I went to a private nutrition school and took a few years of just studying holistic nutrition and then have been going through various trainings and certifications ever since.
Mhm.
Having health training and being health minded is not the same thing as running a business. And so I did like soft launch my business in 2018, 2019, but I didn't really know my who I wanted to work with. I, was still trying to figure myself out. So it wasn't until about 2020, like around the pandemic, when my business started to take off. And that was as a result of me deciding to work with specifically with women. And I think that's when things really started to shift for me, because I had already been introduced to this concept of pro-metabolic or bioenergetic, which I can go into if you'd like. I had been introduced to that years before, like as a client working with some nutritionists, and they introduced me to Ray Peat. They were kind of their practice of nutrition seemed very it was like very different than a lot of the things I had been taught and been told about nutrition as far as like, what to eat and why.
Mhm.
And there was like an intuitive part of me that understood that it made sense. Like it made sense for someone who had a lot of trauma and stress. And so when I started to work with women in 2020 and built a women's health course and wrote an ebook for women also titled Nourishing Our Sanity, and I realized like, oh, this makes sense. So I want to practice under this umbrella of pro metabolic or bioenergetic and gear it specifically towards women. And that's when I started to see like all of the health issues that show up as a result of lack of research for women's health, for instance, or just like the stress component to the things that women are more likely to do, such as diet and starve themselves
Mhm.
over exercise. And and so I did that for, I just worked purely with the metabolism for, well, focusing at least, directly with the metabolism for about 3 years. And through that time, I saw a lot of patterns that made it clear that a lot of women had long-term stress patterns, like old stress
Mhm.
that wasn't getting resolved with the things that we were doing.
Yeah.
And during this time, I also had like some relationship stress I went through that brought up C-PTSD for me. Like I didn't understand that I had C-PTSD. And so I started working on that myself and was like, holy moly, like this is something that a lot of people have. I think it's much more common than PTSD, and we can go into like what it is and why.
Yeah.
So then I shifted gears in 2022 and started going through trainings to work with complex trauma to integrate more of like what I call neurosomatics. So somatics and like go looking at the brain and the body's connection and
Mhm.
what that means. And yeah, here I am today.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. I'm just like, oh, I want to touch on this. I want to touch on this. It's so beautiful too. And just to speak to our listeners, I mean, this isn't just like if you're in an entrepreneurial space, this is like just hearing those pivotal points of your journey. You're like, it was an intuitive nudge. It was something that it just resonated and I went with it. Like that, I feel like it's so easy. I don't want to go off on too big of a tangent, but like it's so easy to just get so conditioned from what we should be doing or XYZ. And then it's like the decisions that you make that stick or that feel the best, guess what? You know, like they're coming from in here. It's like actually when we're making that connection to our inner wisdom. And it's just I noted that when as you were talking, like those pivotal moments were always like you said, like that intuitive, you didn't say intuitive nudge, but you said like that intuitive piece. It's just so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's like a few things there. One thing is it wasn't all obviously like, oh, I should study this because I'm called to and I know what I want and I'm going to do this. And there was definitely periods in because I'm 38 and, it's taken me some time. Like have 2 degrees. It took me a while to finish. And
Mhm.
this is actually a common story for people who have C-PTSD, is there can be a level of disorganization, not really trusting yourself. So I did, again, I did follow things that were called to me and that felt resonant. And I also had a harder time completing things or putting myself out there, or the confidence wasn't always there. And I think that is a component of having trauma and even having chronic illness,
Yeah,
is that you often don't feel like you have the energy or the clarity or the value to
sure.
do the things that you want to do in life. So that is part of my story, is
Yeah.
definitely that, like, um, feeling like, for instance, I had my all of my training in health years completed years before I actually launched my business. I was still doing childcare for years
Mhm.
beyond, what I needed to, really, simply because the confidence, that clarity wasn't necessarily there fully. So that's like one component of it, is just understanding
Yeah.
that, like, if you have CPTSD, you might have some of that. There might be like a start, stop. Several of my clients have multiple degrees because they would finish one and then feel like inadequate to pursue that particular thing. So they would start something new. And then, but the other thing is, I genuinely do believe in intrinsic motivation.
Mhm.
Like, that's been a huge driver in my life. And I think that's actually a big part of my work, is like helping women come back to themselves, return to their true self, identify what their true self is and feels like, and make choices from that space instead of from cultural pressure, from
Yeah.
like narratives outside of themselves, from some sense of morality that's coming from outside of themselves, or from shame, which is a really common thing with trauma. And
Mhm.
so that is, you definitely, you nailed something there when you're, pointing to the fact that, like, I do feel like intrinsic motivation is the only one that's really going to take us, especially when we do have, these repatterning, healing work to do.
Mhm.
We need to be following our own intuition and, like, what feels aligned for us.
Yeah, beautifully, beautifully just further explained. I love that. So I feel like this is a really perfect segue too into kind of touching on, something that we mentioned before recording is like how you're interested in how that modern culture, how it impacts our sense of identity. Being a woman or just a person, but of course, the majority of our listeners are women and you being working with women also. So how do you see like societal expectations affecting women's health? You kind of touched a little bit on that chronic stress, right? But like their health, their well-being, just in terms of that overall those external factors of coming back kind of home to themselves, as you were saying.
Yeah, and to some extent, it's going to depend on the kind of culture that we grew up in.
Mhm.
That definitely plays a role in it. So, like, whether you're raised in, I was raised in a very liberal family in a very liberal area, and um, obviously this doesn't have to be political at all, but more of just like, if you're raised in a really liberal or progressive area, that you're probably gonna be grow up with the idea that you can basically be a man, like you can do whatever men do, and that's like a source of empowerment. And so there's no question of, like, do I have a different body? Do I have a different system? Are there things that, like, affect me differently than men? And then there's like the component of hormonal birth control, which is like this huge, uh, you know, kind of can of worms to open, but like that changed the culture so much for us, because not only did it like open the door for us to actually plan for our lives, it also created a lot of metabolic issues for us, and created this world where I think promiscuity is more common and casual sex is more common. And so that's something that I have been talking about a lot more in my podcast, is just like the ways that women, the benefits, obviously a lot of us want to look at the benefits of like the sexual revolution and kind of third and fourth wave feminism, and I'm actually much more interested in like the trade-offs.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that the benefits aren't there. It just means that, like, more and more women these days are, not having children, even if they want them, just because of cultural messaging, or not prioritizing them, or their fertility isn't great. And so that's also like an issue. Like, we're seeing that in women as they move into their menopausal years, like the mental health struggles they have, because they didn't end up, they missed the boat. They
Mhm.
didn't end up creating the family they wanted to create. Or, another common pattern is like working really hard, just like kind of burning ourselves out,
Mhm.
climbing that, quote unquote, corporate ladder. and then not really feeling like we're getting the quality of life that we want.
Hmm.
Because again, we're told that we should have this like, great career and financial independence and all these things that, I can see the value in all of that, right?
Right.
Like not having any of that. I'm fairly independent myself and have never like been reliant on a man. And also a lot of times that doesn't really leave as much room for, being a mother or for slowing down and taking care of our health. Things that I think are a little bit more like you would think of as intuitive and maybe feminine.
Hmm.
And I believe that's showing up in parallel, that's showing up with all of our health issues because women have a lot of health issues as a sex in this culture. We take the vast majority of autoimmune conditions, endocrine disorders, hypothyroidism. We're 2 to 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with a mental illness.
Hmm.
And I think those things play out in the culture at large.
Sure. So, I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying. And with really helping someone, like, I don't want to say learn their identity because we have so many archetypes, right? Like if you are a mom, if you're a wife, if you are a businesswoman, whatever it is, like there are so many different pieces to us that make us us. So I tend personally saying the word identity is tough for me sometimes and helping with my kids too. Like if they're having an emotion, I'm like, you aren't angry, you are feeling anger. So I trudge very delicately with the word identity, but helping someone who is kind of feeling stuck in this battle, let's say, that inner and outer battle, how do you kind of help them possibly bridge that gap to still live within society, but to stay true to who they are? Is that like part of your, model? I know that's so in depth, right? And it's so
Yeah.
custom to everyone, but can you give a couple tangible, patterns or ways?
Yeah, and I also agree with you. I'm not a big fan of the concept of identity. So, I think what I meant more is like different paths. Like if you have children, you don't have to just be a mother. Like that's
Right.
not the only identity you have, right? Like, and
Yeah.
it's more of like the choices that we make and the fact that as you get older, you start to realize you have very real limitations. And that kind of actually hits on something is I do think the modern world kind of trains us to believe we have this limitless amount of time and resources and choices. And to some extent, we do compared to the past. And so, as an example, as a result of that, we often end up like taking a certain path without considering, other things that we may want for ourselves that previous generations should just naturally did, such as having children. So, in the complex trauma work that I do, we talk a lot about disidentification,
Mm.
which is actually letting go of the shame-based identities that we have created for ourselves and some people's identities are not shame-based. Like some people's identities are sources of, um, uh, they leave them feeling more empowered. They leave them feeling like they have more agency. Where the direction that I come from and the perspective that I have is that all identities are more or less created. And so there's not a solid one for any of us. And a lot of them that we create for ourselves are actually quite limiting and they can be sources of suffering. They can move us farther away from agency.
Mhm.
So, what I do with my clients is I help them look at what's not self. And I use a few different models for that. So, like,
Mhm.
one of them is I do parts work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like IFS. Yeah, I absolutely love it. It's a great tool to look into. It's one of my favorites. So it's a form of therapy, and it was created by Dick Schwartz. And he basically, like, the premise of it is we have an external family that we're born into, and then we have an internal family. And when we come in the world, we have this like true self, right? We have this like spirit, essence, blank slate. And as a result, especially this happens, especially I think with trauma, but as a result of family systems, the culture we're in, potentially not having our needs met, we develop parts. And we have like a few different kinds of parts. We have the exiled parts, which is like the very young, vulnerable parts that we often have to hide away. We disassociate from, they're not safe, they're not accepted. And then we have protector parts. Most of what you interact with when you're interacting with a difficult person or someone with complex trauma is you're often interacting with their protector parts. And then there's like some more extreme versions of protectors, like often call them firefighters. People, the self-sabotage, the addiction parts.
Mhm.
There's different frameworks for using parts. Not everyone uses the exact model that Dick Schwartz created. I actually was trained in a somatic parts.
Hmm.
So I look at how the parts affect the body, how they show up as sensations, as like somatic experiences for people, illnesses, dysregulation.
Hmm.
But the point of this whole practice is that you start to become familiar with an adaptation that you have that is there to protect you from something. In the whole concept I do believe in, which is that there are no bad parts, like the parts that are there that are behaving in a, quote unquote bad way or like maladaptive, they are actually trying to protect you from something.
Sure. Yeah.
And so even most extreme, like things like narcissistic personality disorder, which is a very difficult set of patterns, deep down, like that person is like deeply in pain and that exiled part is buried, and so the protector parts is what most people interact with.
Hmm.
And they're trying to protect that person from shame and pain, right? So obviously that doesn't excuse any harmful behaviors, but it does help you understand them. And when you're working with trauma, that's really important to help someone disidentify with their patterns.
Hmm.
So that's a big part of my work is actually just to help. It's not even just like the getting the rid of the patterns because some of them are old and they can take a long time to to kind of unwind. But it's about creating that space between what's not you and what's you, and understanding that the adult in the room, the one that knows that she's, 30, 35, whatever, she's always there.
Hmm.
And we have to start to recognize. And so I do that through a combination of like psychoeducation, so actually helping my clients understand cognitive distortions, understand like survival-based strategies that they have from unmet needs during developmental years, what their core needs are. All of these little things, recognizing specific parts, how they show up, how they feel, what they tell you consistently, and then disidentifying with them. So, like finding ways that you can actually remain present and observe or engage with the parts without shutting them down, gaslighting yourself, avoiding, disassociating.
Hmm.
And that's a combination. It's a combination of like what we call top down, which is like upper cortical communication, talking, didactic learning type, and then as well as um, like body based somatic practices.
Gosh, I love how did you, is there something called the neurosomatic or did you kind of dub that?
No, that's actually as was one of the programs I took. I took
Okay.
a really amazing program called neurosomatic intelligence, and
Yeah.
it's really like neuroscience heavy, and it's ran by people who do applied neurology for a living,
Hmm.
which that field is like, I think most people only know of it if they're like high-end athletes or they have like a pain disorder, because it's basically like training your brain to relate differently to your body.
Hmm.
And what they teach in that program is just incredible because everyone needs like, so the whole idea of it is like humans work in loops. We
Hmm.
take in inputs, sensory inputs, cognitive inputs, environmental inputs, and then the brain interprets them. And
Hmm.
the brain's either going to interpret them in a neutral way, in a positive way, or a negative way. Everyone has some level of like deficit in the sense that the brain is interpreting signals in a way that's stressful. That's just like humans, again, we're animals constantly taking in these signals
Yeah.
from our environment. And so the problem is if you have trauma or even like illness or injury, your brain's going to be taking in a lot more threat signals. So you can actually retrain the brain to communicate differently with different parts of the nervous system, which i.e. the body,
Hmm.
so that you have less threat that you live with every day.
Hmm.
So just through doing things like, they teach you about like your ocular system, your vestibular system, the difference between interoceptive and proprioceptive information. So like information going to the brain from inside the body versus information going from outside the body
Hmm.
with your body in relation to space. So all of these things are like really, really fascinating, and they are very complex, but you can actually like break them down into kind of like simpler um, ways of understanding things.
Hmm.
And then you can kind of cater your lifestyle in a way that helps you lower that overall stress.
Hmm. Oh, it's so fascinating. And how you're explaining things, it's like, yes, this is the concept that I work with too. But I don't want to say in a different fashion, but it's a different approach. But it's at the core, it's so similar, like that mind-body connection piece. And it's just so the neuroplasticity piece of being able to rewire, right? Oh,
Yeah.
love it. I love it. So Let's dive into a little bit of like the complex trauma, the C-PTSD. What are working with people or even like experiences if you want to share with yourself? What are some patterns that you've noticed within women's health, within their choices, within just kind of moving through life from childhood to adulthood? Kind of just paint that picture for us if that feels okay.
Yeah, for sure. Are you familiar with ACEs?
Yes, if you I've never talked about it on the show though.
Cool, perfect. Well, this is this is a great thing for people to know because it affects a lot of different people. So ACE stands for Adverse Child Experience,
Hmm.
and the ACE study was actually like what put CPTSD on the map because they discovered that people who have higher degrees of adversity in childhood during those like crucial developmental years often had higher likelihood of chronic illness, higher likelihood of financial issues, relationship issues, incarceration, addiction, all of these things. There's a lot of information out there if anyone wanted to Google it.
I
And you can
could,
also,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, there's an ACE scoring system and you can
Yes.
actually take a quiz. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. I have that linked because that was in my certification program too. We had to take that test, or we didn't have to take it,
Nice.
but it offered
Yeah.
that resource. So I'll link that in the show notes if anyone's interested in that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for my work, partly because I worked with children and I studied attachment like in school. And so this is all stuff that learned in my formal education. Not so much about the trauma, but the development. And so something that it was very intuitive and kind of came naturally to me.
Mhm.
And then I also have a higher ACE score. And I like grew up, like I knew going through life, especially as an adult, that I had a difficult childhood and I had trauma, but I didn't really know what that meant and I didn't know what it meant for my health or I didn't have any data or anything to kind of like and I'm very cerebral so if I like to understand things like statistically and if I can then it kind of helps me make sense of the world and like put things together.
Mhm.
So figuring out about the ACE score was really helpful for me because it was like on a personal level was like okay that makes sense. I have an
Yeah.
ACE score of 6. And statistically, like if you have an ACE score of 4 or higher, your chances of having chronic illness go up dramatically.
Mhm.
And so it's also important to understand there's a lot of nuance within all this. So, like, the scoring system isn't perfect in the sense of like you could have a score of 2, but your ACEs were really disruptive. So, you could have more, potentially maladaptive patterns and struggles in life versus someone who has a higher ACE score, but they weren't as disruptive. So, it's all just kind of like, very personal and relative to your situation.
Mhm.
But because the chances of having these issues is so much higher in people who have ACE scores of 4 or higher, or any ACEs even, and I think it's like 65% of the population is, and I think that's an old study too, so who knows what it really is, but like 65% of the population has at least one ACE score. So what that means is like when you're a child, you need certain things in order to develop properly. And you have these like crucial windows of development throughout your early life where if you don't get those needs met consistently and you don't have safety in order to develop, then you develop what we call in my training, which is like NARM, stands for neuroaffective relational model. It's a
Mhm.
form of therapy to address CPTSD specifically is what happens is you develop like adaptive survival strategies. So you adapt to not having these needs met, and then you develop a survival strategy that gets almost like integrated into your neurochemistry, your behavior patterns, your relational patterns, and even your sense of identity or your personality.
Mhm.
And so depending on how, unmet these needs are, how long that lasts, some people, there's all of these patterns wrapped up in who they are, and it's been going on so long that they don't know that's not actually them. And so with CPTSD, we tend to see a lot of like disorganization. So disorganized attachment, internal disorganization. So kind of like low executive function, difficulty finishing tasks, like a lower self-confidence in meeting life's goals. Um, Oftentimes, not really having the like support they needed to finish school or to finish projects, and so things like that tend to show up consistently. Oftentimes health issues. So like if you do have a lack of safety and, lack of the resources needed to meet your needs early in life, then you can have a higher level of stress from a really early age. So like a lot of um, nervous system dysregulation. And as a result of that, you can end up with like toxic stress physiology. So that's like having that higher chance of autoimmunity, falling into like the highly sensitive, there's like a whole world of like highly sensitive people.
Hmm.
And I think that like the growing trend of like highly sensitive and then also like neurodivergence, I think some level of all that is it's just a neurosomatic experiencing of toxic stress physiology from a really young age.
Hmm.
And so again, that can show up as like just struggling with your health, struggling with finances, because again, that's attached to survival, and also like having less secure relationships. So either like not really having relationships is kind of avoiding them because they're too scary, they're too stressful, and we just don't have the skills or the trust to have them, or having them and having them consistently show up as problems in your life, like lots of conflict. C-PTSD is a relational trauma. And so this is something that I didn't realize. Like I started meditating and doing somatic experiencing really early in life. So I got some great like mindfulness tools and embodiment tools, but I would still struggle with my relationship patterns. Like I would get involved with people that were, would stress me out. And it was like this anxious avoidant trap, if you're familiar with like the attachment language. But what I came to realize when I started studying CPTSD is like, oh, I have these disorganized patterns. And these, my experience of relationship is kind of mirroring my parents' relationship, and my early life experience with them. And so understanding that that's a trust, that's an issue of trust, it's an issue of attunement, connectivity. And so when you start to kind of recognize that, you can start to work with those patterns to shift things. And I think it's like taking the neurosomatic approach is one of like hope, because you realize like when you stop looking at yourself as like, oh, I am this way, and start looking at yourself as like I have these patterns,
Yeah.
and you can start to see where they come from, then there's like room for compassion, there's room for empathy, and you actually feel like more like a connected sense of your agency,
Mhm.
which is what we work on. I think that's one of like the main underlying focuses with this work is like reconnecting people to their own personal agency so they understand that they have a role to play here and they can actually exact change in their lives. But yeah, I think those patterns tend to show up again as like um I would say the word disorganization tends to come up a lot in my work. It's not one that people really understand as it relates to like their internal world, but it's like not really having confidence in what it is that you know. Like this feels good, this doesn't feel good. I want this, I don't want this. Basic stuff that people who are raised with a level of security and safety and have their needs met tend to like just naturally follow. When you have CPTSD, all of that gets kind of jumbled around and you don't really trust yourself to actually read your own signals properly.
Mhm.
And that can lead you into a lot of unsafe, unhealthy experiences in life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so, I mean, growing up, I love that you brought up the ACE test and the ACE scoring because, of course, there's all like nothing's going to ever be perfect, right? And I love having that scientific piece of like, hey, take this test. It's what, 10 questions, I think?
Yeah, I think it's like 10. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was so fascinating. I'll definitely link that in the show notes. But I love how you brought up kind of like these patterns of because I've talked about so much like those recurring subconscious patterns, right? And I just love the approach that you're talking about it. It's so fascinating. So in your experience, of course, working with women, like you started dabbling a little bit with like strategy, right? Like what are some key insights, key strategies that you found in helping women kind of move forward and reclaiming their health in, connecting back to themselves and healing and things like that?
Yeah. So I guess one of them is like when I'm working with CPTSD specifically, we look at five needs, like core needs that humans have, and there's a bind that happens when you have CPTSD where you don't feel like you can meet those, but you need them, but you can't meet them, and that's where like kind of the adaptive survival strategies come in. So the first one is connection. Like as soon as we come out of the womb, even before that, I would say we need connection. Like we need to feel like we belong here, we're wanted here. There's a place in this world for us. We matter. And that's actually an underlying need that underlies all the other ones. And we carry that with us throughout our life. It's like, I need to feel connected. And the double bind is like, I need to feel connected, but I don't. Like, I don't feel safe connecting. So that's like that can weave its way through a lot of women's issues. The second one is attunement, which is like I need to feel like my needs are going to be heard. I need to be able to read my signals accurately. If we didn't have those read for us when we were really young, then it can be really hard to know when you're hungry, when you should go to sleep, how much exercise is too much exercise, how much socializing is too much socializing. These signals can get really blurry. And so helping women just be able to read their signals and develop some confidence that they can take care of themselves and attune to themselves I would say is really important. And then trust is a big one. That's one that I have struggled with myself. Actually, funny enough, like right, within less than a year before working with C-PTSD, I got like the word trust tattooed across my
I
chest.
love it. Yeah.
And I was like, I know this is a really important theme for me. And then like when I started studying trauma, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that need to trust ourselves, the need to trust the people closest to us, to trust life. I think working with metabolic health, needing to trust your bodies. Like we live in a culture that is like very extrinsically motivated with health. Like you go to a doctor, they tell you what's wrong with you, you get a pill, you go on your way. It's kind of a spectator sport to like take care of yourself. So helping women actually develop trust. And like one of the things I've been doing lately, which have become more and more passionate about, is like natural fertility. Obviously, like not every woman has that as a resource or a priority. But what I have noticed when I talk about like, fertility tracking and fertility awareness, on like a larger scale online is that I get a lot of pushback from women that don't think it's safe, don't think it's effective, and women in their 30s and 40s that have no idea how their cycles work whatsoever. And it's like, to me, I actually find it heartbreaking because this is like a kind of a superpower to be able to take care of your body and read your signals. And I noticed that a lot of my clients who have CPTSD, they have a harder time in the second half of their cycle. Like CPTSD is a relational trauma, so it shows up as like shame. So like things that you would think of that you struggle with if you're like, PMSy,
Yeah.
like taking things personal, feeling lonely, having like heightened rejection sensitivity. Those are things that a lot of women with CPTSD have all the time. So then they move into the second half of their cycle, and if their hormones are not balanced, then they feel that acutely.
Yeah.
And it can show up as like PMDD even.
Hmm.
And so understanding that and being able to track that is actually like a huge source of empowerment. So I definitely like tried to help them understand the link and the like crossover between their trauma patterns and their metabolism.
Hmm.
Like if you have a low metabolism, then you often feel kind of like tired, weak, frail, cold. That plays out in like your sense of who you are. And that can really affect a woman's self-confidence and like her decisions she makes, the cognitive distortions that take over her brain, her behaviors. And so, yeah, so I help them track and kind of like get to know these basic needs. The next one after trust is autonomy. This is like the one that we develop when we're younger, where we feel safe enough to go and explore. We have a healthy attachment to our parents, so we can go off and do our own thing, knowing that we can come back when we need to. If we didn't have that safety and when we were younger, then oftentimes what happens is, well, two patterns that I see. One is that like women just don't feel confident doing things on their own. They don't feel like they have the power to lead their own lives. There's kind of like a feeling of like I'm waiting for something to come around and lead me and save me. And then the other one is like a heightened sense of autonomy, which is something that I actually developed, which was like I can do this myself. I don't need anyone. And what tends to happen is you burn yourself out. You don't let people support you. You end up really lonely because you like have geared your life around like doing everything yourself. And then the last one, and this is one that I've been talking about more as I talk about like sexuality and kind of cultural norms around that, is the love and sexuality need, which is like when we're younger, you have children. So I mean, people know this, I think, in general, intuitively, but if you have children, you really get this. Children have this like open heart, like they have this need to connect with the heart, and they don't really want to spend a lot of time with people that don't allow them access to that, right? Like if someone's cold or disconnected or disassociated, children will naturally not want to be around them. They want to be around their people that they can keep their heart open around. That's a need, that's a developmental need. And that doesn't go away when we become sexual, like when we move into puberty. We still need to keep our heart open.
Hmm.
The problem is if you didn't have safety when you were younger and you don't have safety through adolescence, you learn to split. you develop a love sex split where you actually begin to develop yourself, your identity sexually as separate from your identity with your heart.
Mm.
And oh, I just got like kind of emotional.
That just really resonated
Yeah.
with me too. When you just said that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, I
Ah.
just recorded a podcast. It hasn't I haven't sent it to my editors yet, but I'm gonna interview a woman that used to work as a prostitute,
Mhm.
and her memoir just like blew me away. And before I interview her, I wanted to do like a solo podcast to talk about my direct experiences because I've like dabbled online with like FetLife, and anyways it's a tangent we don't need to go on, but like I've had some like direct experiences with the kind of growing trend of sex work online and just like the normalization of it and promiscuity and all that, so I have a lot of thoughts on it from a trauma perspective. And I believe that there's a lot of people out there that are just operating with love sex splits. And it's not just from trauma. Like, I also think we have a culture where casual sex and promiscuity is so normalized that a lot of people are engaging with it, even though it's not really what they need or want.
Yeah.
And so when you have that love sex split, oftentimes you will end up in less safe experiences. You end up disassociating during sex. You end up sexual fawning can be a pattern that you have. You're more likely to do something like sex work or, something that kind of like objectifies you and removes you from the experience. And so these five needs are all needs that we have, and everyone has them.
Mhm.
Everyone has these needs, and they don't go away as we get older. But we carry those patterns, those survival patterns with us if we didn't get those needs met.
Mhm.
And this is for me, this is like because I don't think every adversity is trauma. Like, I think that there's potentially potentially a little bit of a broad communication when it comes to trauma where you can label anything trauma, and that almost like gives trauma a bad name. Like, there are certain people who just don't even want to talk about it because they think it's like being misused, like like I've seen people in podcasts talk about that, and I think that bums me out because there's like legitimate developmental disruptions that happen for
Mhm.
people with ACEs. And if we can understand them, then we can understand like what trauma actually is.
Yeah, totally. Oh gosh. So where can we find you? Where can we support you? Where can we learn more about you and working with you? Just, yeah, I know that you have a podcast. Share more of where we can find you.
So I did take somewhat of a hiatus from the internet, like to slow down my engagement because I the more I work with trauma and the nervous system, like the less I actually want to be online.
I'm still there. Yeah.
I mean I'm still there as well, but I'm trying to, as a business owner, I like as I'm trying to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
keep a balance. And so I'm mostly on Instagram, and I am like working on picking up my engagement on there and just posting more often. So I'm on Instagram. I'm also kind of on Facebook. Like, I would say Instagram is probably the social media platform that I'm most likely to engage with you, or you're gonna see like up to date content. I have a website, kymbermaulden.com. You can find me there if you want to, send me a message or just like kind of look at what I offer.
Mhm.
And then I have this podcast, and that's Nourishing Our Sanity. And that's I'm probably like, one of my favorite projects right now. And I would love for, your listeners to go and check that out.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be, I think, releasing episode 12. And so I'm still pretty new.
Mhm.
But so far it's been like super rewarding, and
Yeah.
I'm a long form kind of person.
Yeah.
So it's a really great place to be able to, I mean, you have a podcast. So as you know, like to be able to have conversations that just can't happen on social media.
Yeah, I podcasting is it. Like, oh, I have such a strong passion with podcasting. I tried blogging, but I love writing, but podcasting, there's just something special about it. So yes, I will link that, your podcast, your website, everything will be in the show notes. Thank you so much. Like, it was just such a pleasure to meet you today and just to talk
Yeah,
back and
same.
forth. So fascinating. And the work that you do is monumentally needed. It's so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to be here. I feel honored to be here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank
Oh,
you.
and to all of our listeners, we are sending you so much love, so much light, and you have everything inside of you to learn your energy of alignment and be unapologetic in who you are. We're sending our love and light.
Did you find this episode freeing or empowering? Please read my review. Tickle, 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 boop.
Thank you for spending this sacred time with me on Naturally Empowered Living. If this episode brought you closer to stepping into your energy of alignment, I'd love for you to leave a written review and share how this show has supported your journey. Your feedback truly lights me up and helps others find the space of transformation. And sharing it with someone who might need it spreads the ripple of healing even further. Be sure to check the show notes for ways to connect with me and explore personalized healing sessions and mentorships to deepen your self-awakening journey. Thank you. I appreciate all you are and all you do.